Grandpa. Tell us about how you met each other and your courtship and all that.
I met him in Gatewood right after my oldest brother died. And I was going to church on Sunday night, and my sister and I were, and we decided we would go back home. We thought maybe Mom should be with her, since my brother had just been buried a day or two before. And so another girl, a friend of mine, came along and asked me to go with them on a double date. So they said, we'll get one of the Christian boys. So that's how I met him. And from there on, we dated off and on. That was in 1939. And we dated off and on until 1942. That's when we were married, in November the 10th.
How old were you when you got married?
I was almost 22.
And Grandpa?
We were married in November, and I would have been 22 in January.
Okay.
He was 3 years older than me.
What was, now where was Grandpa's family from?
Well, his family was basically from Carlisle or Scarborough, West Virginia. At the time I met him, they were in Brooklyn. They'd moved down to a mining town down there in Brooklyn. And that's where they were living when I met him.
What was Grandpa doing at the time? Was he working or?
He was working in the coal mines. So
how long, when you got married, how long did you continue to live in West Virginia?
I didn't. He was in service when we got married. We were married in 1942. Yeah. Did I say 42? And he went in service. And when he got out of service, we moved to Delaware. So really, we didn't live there after we were married at all in West Virginia. So we moved into Newark, Delaware.
So you were married in West Virginia, and then?
Well, we spent a lot of time in Georgia. He was in service, and he was stationed in Georgia. So I would spend time there.
Tell us about what life was like when the war came about, and when Grandpa went to the war.
Well, you didn't have television, so you listened to the news every night to see what was happening. And it was rather, the word I want to use, it was a little bit hard to describe, because you never knew what the news was going to be. And then they always made it, really sound terrible. It was terrible, but since you couldn't see it, because at that time we didn't have television.
And did Grandpa go into service before or after the war started? Did he go in because he was drafted, or?
Yes.
And how?
He enlisted, but he knew he was going to be drafted.
Okay.
So he thought that he and his brother might be able to go together, but they didn't. They both went in, but not together.
How often did you hear from Grandpa when he was overseas?
Well, he wasn't overseas very long. He went overseas in August of '44, and he was wounded in, I think it was December. Then was shipped back to the States. And after he came back to the States, he got to come home and leave periodically. He was discharged in the summertime. But how often, I don't know just how often it was. I know that when he was wounded, I didn't hear from him for weeks. And everybody said no news is good news, but it wasn't. The next thing I got was the notice that he had been wounded, and then that was in France, northern France. And then he was sent to England to recuperate. And from there he was flown back to New York.
And he still still stayed in the service for a while after he got back to the States? So you weren't reunited right away?
No, he came home, but he didn't get to stay home.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't long until he was discharged.
And Aunt Joanne was born while he was
He was in service
in the service.
just before he went overseas.
Tell us about Aunt Joanne and Dad when they were born and kind of their growing up.
Joanne was born in Gatewood. She was born at home. The doctor delivered her at the house. And when she was 5 weeks old, the doctor released me so I could come back to Delaware because we thought he would get to stop on his way overseas. And he didn't. The train sat right in front of the house, but of course he couldn't get off. So she was, time he got discharged, she was about 9 months old.
Okay.
Then Jim was born in 46, about a year after he got out of service. About approximately a year.
What did you do after you moved to Delaware and after the war was over?
Lived in a housing project. Stayed home then, of course. I didn't work then. I worked some before he got out of service, before the kids were born. Worked at a powder plant in Elkton, Maryland.
What jobs did you do over the years?
When I was in high school, I stayed with 2 different families. In my junior year, I stayed with one family. My senior year, I lived with another family. Then after I worked in Woolworths.
Mm-hmm.
Then after I graduated from high school, I moved to Christiansburg, Virginia, and I worked in the overall factory there. I was there, I guess, from I graduated in class of 40, so I guess it was early 41 when I left and went to Virginia to work. And I was there until early 43. And then I left and I went spent time in Georgia because Harold was stationed there. Stayed there for a while, came back to Delaware and worked in the canteen at the powder plant. And then I went back to Georgia again. When I came back the next time, of course, I was pregnant with Joanne. So then I stayed with my in-laws for a little while. Then I went back to my mother's in West Virginia, which is where she was born.
And after the kids were in school, then you went back to work?
I did. I worked in the school cafeteria for 10 years because they were going to school there, and I could be home when they were home. So that worked out well. So I worked there for about 10 years. In the summertime, I had off when they had off, so that was no problem. And then I went to work at Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and I worked there for about 18 years.
What did you do with them?
I took care of the coffee break and served food part-time.
How did you come to know Christ?